Hey everybody, so I did a list of my top 10 black metal albums, and that inevitably led to a request for my top 10 progressive metal albums. So that's certainly a list I'm happy to make because I'm a progressive rock and progressive metal nerd from the word go, as you probably have gleaned just from looking at me. But also, that progressive metal is one of the styles leaned into by my band, Axis of Empires, whose new third studio album, Heretics and Orthodoxy, is due for release before the end of the year, currently in post-production. Anyway, so in fact, as soon as I get done with this, I'm going to go right into mixing the album. Actually, I might take a break and play Carto. It's this PS4 game I've really gotten into. Anyway, but so that's, yeah, Axis of Empires we do, and the first two albums are on streaming. Go check it out. But anyway, we lean into progressive metal, heavily into power metal as well, kind of that whole vein of music. So anyway, this is a list I'm happy to make. Now, some clarifications. One, it's going to be 13 because I just could not narrow it down to 10. You'll see why. There's some albums on here that I was like, I can't leave that one out. I can't leave that one out. That said, this list is by no means exhaustive. There are tons of incredible prog metal bands out there. I could go on forever. A couple of things. In my previous video, I recommended Imaginary Sonicscape by Psy. That is arguably a progressive metal or progressive black metal album as well. It's got all the accoutrements of a progressive rock, progressive metal album, you know, diverse instrumentation, odd time signatures, atypical song structures, blending of genres, all the things, you know, kind of heavy lyrics, more cerebral lyrics, albeit, you know, very demonic and bloodthirsty cerebral lyrics and that kind of thing. So it's got all of those elements, but since I already talked about it in the last list, I'm not going to include it in this list. Then anyway, the other thing is there's not going to be a Tool album on this list, and the reason for that, Tool is an amazing band. Tool is an amazing progressive metal band. They are arguably one of the most important progressive metal bands in the world, and they deserve credit for keeping progressive metal alive at a time when, and developing new interest in progressive music at a time when prog rock in general was not mainstream, and heavy metal in general was not mainstream. So I love Tool. I listen to them a lot, and they deserve a lot of credit. But I couldn't pick just like the specific one because it's like, if we go by album I've listened to the most, probably 10,000 Days. It has the most bangers on it, you know, like Vicarious, Jambi, The Pot, just one, and then the ballads, you know, Wings of Marie and all that, just incredible music all around. That's the one I probably listen to the most, has my favorite production out of all of them. Lateralis has to me is their best, deepest, most atmospheric concept album and everything. And so that's another one I would I would highly recommend. But then if I was telling people, like, if you're getting into Tool, and I'm assuming most people who are watching this are already very familiar with Tool, but if you're getting into Tool, like, you should probably start with Anima, you know. So it's hard to say, like, what is the album in that regard. It's not like you can go to Nirvana and say Nevermind, that kind of thing. It's so there's that aspect of it. The first two records, Opiate and Undertow, are good albums, but I don't feel like they came into their own yet. I mean, they're great records. I love them, but it feels more like progressive grunge more than like the really unique Tool sound that we would ultimately cherish and everything. And then with Fear Inoculum, I could do a whole separate video on that, and I might just do that because I have surprisingly very polarized opinions about that album. A lot of positives, a lot of negatives. It's a whole thing. Anyway, so without further ado, let's dive into this list. Like I said, not an exhaustive list at all. It's going to be 13. I think I said that already. It's going to be 13 instead of 10 because I just could not narrow it down, and you'll see why. So, and the last clarification. Number 1 and number 2 are easily my favorite albums from this genre, and easily my favorite albums, period. But other than that, they are number one and number two. Other than that, this is not in any kind of hierarchy. These are just a bunch of great albums that I highly recommend. I recommend all of them equally. Anyway, so coming in at number 13, Devin Townsend, Ocean Machine. This is his first solo album, and it probably sounds pretty constrained and very kind of small in scope compared to the tremendous ground he would go on to cover with, his solo band, with Strapping Young Lad, with the Devin Townsend Project, all of the stuff that he does. It seems very small by comparison, but it's such an interesting showing from him. Before this, he was really, before he launched all of the solo stuff, he was really only known for being the singer on the Steve Vai album Sex and Religion, which is a absolutely amazing album if you've never heard it. People were kind of confused about what to make of it at the time. It came out at a time when hair metal was not really in vogue, but it is very much a hair metal album. But then it's weirdly like a progressive hair metal album at the same time. It's just this very weird thing, but in retrospect, the musicianship is beyond extraordinary. And Devin Townsend gives one amazing vocal performance after the other. Then he goes on to Ocean Machine, and I really love this because it's like, I love the Deftones. I love Deftones, but they were very much an acquired taste for me. I did not get into them with Around the Fur like everybody else did. I appreciated them, I just didn't get into it. And it took me time to even develop an appreciation for White Pony. It was not until much later, in the later albums, that I really started to appreciate Deftones. To me, what Devin Townsend did with Ocean Machine, it feels like what the Deftones were aiming at with those early albums and not quite hitting. He's doing those out, that style, that sound, and it's got this, he has this this very dulcet baritone voice and everything, instead of the weird cha-ching kind of, weird free association sort of vocal thing. And it just fits a lot better, and it just gets you, to me, it's just this very almost meditative album. You're just being hit with these walls of distortion, and it just, these walls of sound, and his voice just fills you, So it's such a cool record. It's got such great songwriting on it. So out of all the Devin Townsend records, that's my favorite, just because it's so accessible. It's such a quick and easy doorway into his world. And once you've gone through that doorway, everything else he does kind of makes a lot more sense, I think. So Ocean Machine, amazing record. And then coming in at number 12, probably the most chart-topping album on this list, Queensryche, Operation Mindcrime. I'll tell you when I first heard this record. So I've been playing guitar for maybe a few months, and I was taking lessons and, learning a lot, but the guy I was working with, great guy, but not a metal guitarist at all. And so he knew a couple of metal techniques, but could not really show me the style. So I was listening to like Master of Puppets, it was like my number one album. And I was trying to figure out how do I get the sound. I didn't even understand palm muting at this point to get the and all that. Or alternate picking or anything like that. And I was like, how do I get this sound? I must have, this sound. I must be able to play like this. So we, one day, our thing, my parents and I, our thing for like an occasional like Saturday, fun day sort of thing was just to go up to Memphis. Memphis was about an hour north of where we lived in Mississippi. And so we would drive up to Memphis and just go do all kinds of fun stuff. And it was so fun for me because I got to be back in the big city again and feel like I was not feel like I was cut off from the world that way. And so after I started playing guitar, we started getting into, I started going to guitar stores while I was in Memphis, and we went to Strings and Things, and I was about 13 at this point, 13, 14 at this point, maybe a little older, and I'd been playing guitar and I'd been learning techniques, but I went to Strings and Things, and the guys there, there were guys there that, like, I understand this was my first encounter with metal guitarists in person. I mean, I had seen Metallica perform live at this point, but this was my first like up close encounter with metal guitarists, just the guys that worked there. And I remember I was playing this. They had one of the James Hetfield Explorers, and I was dicking around with it, and I wasn't really getting much out of it. And this one guy took the guitar. This one employee took the guitar. He said, "Here, let me show you some stuff." And wanted me to hear how the guitar was really supposed to sound, not this rank amateur playing it. And he sat down and he started playing like Master of Puppets, Seek and Destroy, all the Metallica riffs and everything, and he's just flying through that shit and shredding. And I've never seen guitar played this way in front of me before in my life. This thing that sounded like this superhuman thing, and I was just entranced. This is a guy that worked there, but I was just entranced. It was like, finally it's possible. Here's someone that speaks this cryptic language that I'm trying to decode. And so that was like this very defining moment in my life, and I don't even know who that guy is or where he is anymore or anything. But after that, we went to Barnes and Noble. Not Barnes and Noble, I'm sorry, Borders. This was back when Borders Books and Music was still a thing, and back when CD kiosks, listening stations were still a thing. And so shopping around shopping around Borders, and I wish Borders had survived, not Barnes and Noble, because I always did like Borders franchises more. But anyway, walking around Borders, and I went up to one of the listening kiosks, and on this listening kiosk was Queensryche, Operation Mindcrime, Yngwie Malmsteen, Facing the Animal, and Richie Kotzen, one of the Richie Kotzen albums, and it was Electric. It's the one where it's on a white cover, a white background, and he's standing there with a blue guitar, and it's Electric something. I can't think of it. Anyway, but these three records were there, and my mind is still blown from all the shredding that I just saw. Oh my God, it's real. It can actually be done. And you have to understand, like, the internet was not what it was today. I didn't have, like, this ability to just go find video of people playing this, so amazingly. This was before, Google image search was a thing. It's like if you wanted, pictures of turtles, you had to go find, like, bobsturtlepictures.com or something, that kind of thing. And so I'm listening to these three albums, and they're all blowing my mind. But I think the one out of all of them, and Facing the Animal is my favorite Yngwie Malmsteen record to this day. But out of all of them, Operation Mindcrime was just a whole other thing. And I remember the next time we were in Memphis, I wanted to buy that album, and my dad looked at the titles of the songs on the Operation Mindcrime album. Is like, The Needle Lies, Spreading the Disease. He's like, no, you can't have that. So it was still another couple of years before I was old enough to actually get Operation Mindcrime. But anyway, that album, that's my, like, slice of life of how I first heard Queensryche. And like I said, you have to remember, there was no internet, there was no streaming services. You found it, there was this whole world of progressive metal music that I would not have known existed because, the people that programmed MTV just didn't feel like the most important genre of all time needed to be preserved in any way. So that's how I found out about Queensryche. And the youth pastor at my church was he was a guitarist and big on guitar and Dream Theater and Steve Vai. I found out about Steve Vai from him. That's another story. But anyway, I asked him about Queensryche. He was like, oh yeah, and he told me all the stuff about Queensryche, how they would have actors come out on stage and act out the songs, and do little skits and vignettes and everything, and just all sounded so cool to me because I was also a theater nerd and a music theater nerd, so this was just bringing everything together perfectly. And so I was just captivated by Queensryche, and went on to become a huge, ginormous Queensryche fan. Believe it or not, I even love Q2K. That's an album that got People called it grunge Reich. People said they were trying too hard to be Seattle sounding and everything. I don't hear that at all. I do think it's a more it's a more AOR sound, but it's definitely still Queensryche. And I love that album. I did not like Tribe, just to be clear, but and all of and after a point, after Operation Mindcrime 2, I lost interest in what Queensryche was doing, like with Jeff Tate just having an iron fist on the whole thing. And when Dedicated to Chaos came out, I just thought that title must have been chosen ironically. It's the most boring record. But ever since they got Todd LaTorra in the band, I've really liked the stuff. Condition Human is my favorite Todd LaTorra album, Queensryche album. Anyway, so that record was huge for me. Moving right along, 11, Fate's Warning, Awaken the Guardian. Oh, this is one of if there was ever a more progressive, a band more emblematic of the specifics of what it means to be a prog metal band than Dream Theater, it's Fate's Warning. And Ray Adler is actually, I think, probably the only guitarist that shows up twice on this list. We'll explain why in a minute. You'll see why in a minute. Not Ray Adler. Jim Matheos. Sorry, I can't think right now. Jim Matheos. And but anyway, absolutely amazing record. It's that perfect combination of like speed metal with odd time, thrash metal with odd time signatures and everything. And it just sounds like if space aliens came to Earth and went to a thrash metal concert and flew home and had to recreate what they heard, this is what it would sound like, and it's such an amazing record, such a slamming album. I love the Ray Adler era too, but I am totally totally in favor of John Arch is a infinitely better vocalist than Ray Adler. My personal opinion, not just my personal opinion, he is. John Arch is a much better vocalist. And this album is arguably his best vocal performance. But I do love all the eras. That said, I saw Fate's Warning when they were on tour with Queensryche and Dream Theater during the 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence tour. And Ray Adler, when they went back to the Awaken the Guardian era, he was trying to hit John's high notes, and I was just standing there thinking, you live your truth, sir. Anyway, so number 10, Porcupine Tree, In Absentia. Now, this is where we get into, just like with black metal, we get into this murky genre of Mitzi's chasing a Kroger receipt, if you're wondering what that rustling noise is. But we get into this murky area with these albums because it's like, would Porcupine Tree qualify as progressive metal? Like, that's the thing, because you listen to a song like Blackest Eyes, and that's a huge, heavy riff that it opens up with, but then there's so much acoustic guitar stuff, folksy stuff in there. It almost sounds like, they almost sound more like progressive alternative rock than like strictly prog metal. But, Wikipedia has one of their genres listed as prog metal, and there's tons of heavy parts, so I'm going to include it. And also because this is just a huge album for me anyway, and to show you how huge of an album it is, over here on my, you can't really see it, but over here on my shelf of knickknacks and memorabilia, I have this signed copy of In Absentia, signed by all of the members of the band from this lineup. And so, yes, Steve Wilson, obviously, Gavin Harrison, all of that. When they signed this for me at Virgin Megastore, so what was happening was I was at Berkeley at the time, and right next door to Berkeley at the time was the Virgin Megastore, which had 3 stories to it, 3 levels. And before, they were doing a show at the Berkeley Performance Center, which I was going to see that night, and then they were doing an acoustic set at the Virgin Megastore. And so the coffee shop area of the Virgin Megastore was on the 2nd floor. So I'm going to this thing, and I get on the escalator, and I get on the escalators. I'm going up the second floor, and I look up, and Steve Wilson is standing right there next to me on the escalator, and you know, he's like he's such a his fashion choices. He's such a benign person visually. He was just wearing, like, I remember, a sweater and jeans. You know, he was not ostentatious at all. But I looked and I realized who I was standing next to, and I just said, "You're him." And he doesn't look at me. He just straightens his glasses, staring off into the distance. He straightens his glasses and says, "Yes, I am him." I thought that was so cool. And then the acoustic set was great. I did. I literally took the plunge and handed him my number with my phone number and my email address, and said, "If you ever need a guitarist for a project, please call me." He hasn't called in 20 some odd years. He hasn't called up, but you know, I'm still hopeful. But anyway, so that's an amazing record. It's such again, atmosphere is such an important thing in progressive metal. Atmosphere is what makes all the difference between it being really captivating, moving music that's going to really reach people, and just musical masturbation, which, granted, prog metal is prone to doing that. And it's kind of like, you know, the track for me, if you listen to an album, for example, like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Brain Salad Surgery, the most important track on that album is Still You Turn Me On, because that's got that haunting, darkly whimsical, gothic, reflective feel to it and everything. That sets up the atmosphere of this beautiful H.R. Geiger inspired soundscape that we're occupying. So atmosphere is so important, and Porcupine Tree delivers atmosphere in spades. In Absentia, absolutely. Deadwing, absolutely. On and on. And yes, I love the new album. And then I love Steve Wilson's solo albums in the interim. So yeah, phenomenal record, huge influence. They did a great show at the BPC. I don't know if I already said this. Robert Fripp was the opening act. It was his solo guitar stuff where he's doing like layers of sound effects and everything, and that was really cool too. But it pissed me off because someone in the audience shouted, "Play something!" Like, fuck you, man. Listen to what he's doing. But anyway, that was great. So the next one, I will be very impressed if anyone knows this band, but this is one of my favorite bands. Pallas, Pallas, with the album The Cross and the Crucible. Oh my God, this record. So it's a concept album about the clash between science and religion, so tackling some very high concepts, but they tell it in these little narrative vignettes, you know, these smaller narrative vignettes about people dealing with different problems and different issues and that kind of thing. And so this album, Pallas emerged out of what was known as the neo-progressive movement of the early 1980s. And what happened was, in the early 1980s, in all of the areas where prog rock had been most popular in Europe, you know, in Western Europe and the UK, and that's, you know, the United Kingdom and all of those areas, punk took over in a very real way in the late 70s, early 80s. And that really shifted the attention away from prog rock, but there were still all of these people who still wanted to play prog rock. And so you had these bands that started absorbing the all of the pop songwriting sensibilities, all of the moody introspective lyrics, all of the instrumentation and synthesizer sounds and everything of the new wave and new romantic bands that were emerging. You know, you had bands like Ultravox coming out, Sting and the Police were coming out, and all of this stuff. And there were these prog bands that were very influenced by that. Rush was heavily influenced by that, and that brought them around to making some of their best albums, one of which obviously is going to be on this list. But there were these bands coming out that were taking all of that and combining it with progressive rock and creating something really special. And the most legendary band from that movement is Marillion. And I know y'all are probably waiting for me to say that name. Marillion, and in the United States, Marillion is kind of regarded as a one-hit wonder, where their most well-known song is Kaylee, which is an amazing song, all around an amazing song. And off of an amazing album, Misplaced Childhood. If I do a just purely progressive rock, top 10 prog rock albums, that'll be on that. But anyway, Kaylee was their hit song. And that started the neo-prog movement. So it was like, how do we combine 80s synth pop with classic progressive rock? Palace is my favorite band from this genre. And Palace, what happened was they started out doing very traditional kind of jangly sounding guitars and everything. And then Niall Matheson joined the band and he was like, no, we're going to make this a metal band. And so they started doing albums with a much, much heavier tone. And The Cross and the Crucible is the best realization of that. It's the perfect combination of it's the perfect combination of like that stuff you love about prog rock, where you just drift off to Middle Earth and Narnia and all of the magical realms of fantasy and imagination, and you feel like you're soaring through magical mountains on Falkor and in Fantasia and all of that stuff. It's all of those sounds, but with such intricate, heavy guitars, guitars worthy of Robert Fripp. And and Niall Matheson has some of the best phrasing and some of the best melodic sense of any lead guitar soloist you'll ever hear. And so you are just when you listen to a Palace album, you are in their world, and it is their world and theirs alone, and it is so captivating. I am a purist for the Alan Reed era, and I know that he's back in the band. The new album is coming out, and Alan Reed is back on vocals, which is fucking awesome. I did not like the guy they replaced him with. But the Alan Reed era, which is The Wedge and Beat the Drum, The Cross and the Crucible, The Dreams of Men, all of those albums, they're all incredible, but The Cross and the Crucible is my favorite. And just like Tool with Lateralis, it's their most atmospheric and conceptually well-realized album as well. Like The Wedge is clearly meant to be like more top 40 singles oriented. This is prog metal through and through, even with incredible melodies, incredible vocals, all of that. I am 30 minutes into this, and I've only done, 3 or 4. Anyway, coming in at number 8 is going to be Ghost Reveries by Opeth. I was tempted. I love Opeth. I'm more like a lot of people. I'm more of a purist for the era that started with Blackwater Park and went through Watershed, like that era. I like everything they've done since then has not been progressive metal in my mind. It's been kind of like this kind of progressive goth rock sort of thing. I like it. I saw them do it live and was really impressed. But again, I'm a purist for the classic era. And this one to me just really captures it. This was like when I started really getting into Opeth, this is one that I was really sitting down with a lot. I was going to say the first Opeth album I really got into is Damnation and Deliverance, which, yes, it's technically 2 releases, but it's 1 album overall. And I got heavily into Damnation and Deliverance because I think it was the Roundhouse recordings, the live video of that, where they played both of those albums. And I really got into that. But Ghost Reveries for me just captures everything about what Opeth is. And again, you would be hard-pressed to find a more atmospheric band than Opeth. And like I said, when it comes to prog metal and prog rock, atmosphere is what sells it. Atmosphere is what keeps it from being musical masturbation. And, Opeth in this classic period, nothing ever feels masturbatory. It is just this beautiful, dark, neo-gothic soundscape. And yeah, it's incredible. Moving on to number 7, oh boy, 5 by Symphony X. I fucking love Michael Romeo's guitar playing. Yes, I have been so influenced by Michael Romeo. Yes, I have studied his parts up and down. Yes, I am entranced by his playing like nothing else. Also, Russell Allen is one of the best fucking vocalists in the history of prog metal. I met him once at an Adrenaline Mob gig, and he's a really nice guy. He's fucking tall, too, man. I'm 6'2" and he was taller than me, and I don't think it was just the boots he was wearing. Like, he was a tall dude. But anyway, really nice guy. And so I love this album. I love kind of the musicianship is beyond stellar, obviously, but underneath it all, there's some really great kind of cerebral ideas about kind of Eastern occultism, like dealing with Egypt, Egyptian mythology and that sort of thing, and great occult imagery and all of that, and just this fascinating kind of alchemical concept that they have going on behind it. Top-notch songwriting too, and just the band is just firing on all cylinders. Highly recommended. Number 6, Star One, Space Metal. So this is one of the projects of Anthony Arhane Lucassen. In fact, it's I think it's supposed to be Arjane, but I'm hooked on saying the silent J. Anyway, it's so everybody knows Anthony Arhane Lucassen for Arion, and Arion is an amazing band, and the Universal Migrator albums are just beyond amazing. But and everything, he's like Devin Townsend, just everything he does is brilliant. But this project, this came out when I was in college, and I was just so blown away by it, because the idea with Star One, Space Metal was the first album that came out, and the idea with Star One is that every track is based on a different movie, science fiction book or film, like a famous science fiction franchise or property or movie or something. And he gets some really cool stuff in there. He's got a song on this album called Star Child, which is from 2001 Space Odyssey. There's a song called Perfect Survivor, which is based on Alien, a song called Sand Rider, which is based on Dune. Some incredible vocal harmonies. The vocal harmonies you hear on the chorus of Songs of the Ocean. The vocal harmonies you hear on the Eye of Ra. It's just like in the Eye of Ra, there's a moment where the vocal harmonies are so incredible that the band just drops out and this giant choir is just blowing your mind. The songs are just amazing. And the Songs of the Ocean is based on, I believe, Star Trek IV, and the Eye of Ra is based on Stargate. And so it's just such a cool album. Russell Allen is one of the vocalists. Also, there's two female vocalists, and they are Floor and Irene Jansen, who you will now know Floor Jansen as the singer for Nightwish. And I was so happy when she became the singer for Nightwish, because she is the best vocalist Nightwish has ever had, even more so than Tarja. Definitely more so than Annette Olzone. I saw Nightwish live with Annette Olzone, and I'm sorry, she's probably a lovely woman in real life, but on stage she sounded like Minnie Mouse on helium. It was awful. So I could not have been, and my favorite Nightwish album is the Wishmaster, but also I really love the Storytime album, Imaginarium, and that's got her on it. But when Floor got in Nightwish, that was amazing. Anyway, this band, such a cool sound, and my guitar teacher at the time, Joe Stump, gave me a copy of the album, and I listened to it, and I was just captivated beyond. When I say this was on my headphones like every single day, man, I just listened the hell out of this album, and I can't recommend it enough. It is such a fun album. It's so cool, and he's done multiple follow-up albums since. So the second album was Victims of the Modern Age, which was a really great record. So the first one dealt with songs about outer space movies and books and whatnot, and the second one dealt with the apocalypse or nuclear, apocalypse, post-apocalyptic stuff, and that was Victims of the Modern Age. And so that line obviously comes from A Clockwork Orange, which is kind of about urban decay and apocalyptic urban decay and everything. But and there's a song based on Clockwork Orange. There's one based on, I think, the Matrix, or one based on the Matrix, one based on Firefly. So really cool stuff. And then they just put a new one out too, which is about it's about time travel, different time travel things. So like Donnie Darko, Bill and Ted, all kinds of cool stuff. So anyway, so there's that. And then moving on, Ark, Burn the Sun. Ooh boy, oh my God. So this is one of those like super obscure albums. These guys were poised. They came out, this album came out, they only did 2 records. This was the second one. It came out on Steve Vai's Favored Nations record label, and easily my favorite Favored Nations release. And so this band, how to describe it? Like, again, one of those things where you just feel like these guys are on their own plane of existence, but the songwriting inside of all of the prog rock excesses and everything, all of the odd meters, all of the virtuosity, all the swing, the songwriting was so fucking good, and the song, the title track, Burn the Sun, all of it, just every song on this record though is just absolutely amazing. The playing is stellar, but what really sells it is their singer Jorn Land, who went on to he's sang for Masterplan and a bunch of other metal bands. He left the band after the tour for this album, and that pretty much broke up the band. Unfortunately, they never came back from that. But they had some incredible members. Randy Coven was their bass player, for example. And then he died, so a reunion is pretty much impossible at this point. But this record was so just so cool. But Jorn Land's voice is their secret weapon. He is such an amazing singer. He's like the Neil Peart of vocalists. I mean, it's just incredible. Go listen to him. Go listen to this album. It's still on streaming and everything. Oh my God. And again, this is another one. It's one of those things where it's like, it just gets inside you, man. Like, it's one of those records that if you're like me and you're at that time in your life where the music that's going to define you, you're finding the music that's going to define you as a kid and everything. Oh, it just so got into me. So got into my soul. I can't recommend enough. Ark, Burn the Sun. Moving on, I had mentioned that Jim Matheos was the only person that showed up twice on this list, and that is because his supergroup OSI, or Office of Strategic Influence, comes in at number 4. Office of Strategic Influence, it's really just called OSI, but it means Office of Strategic Influence. This was such a cool record. It came about, there was a short-lived department under the Bush II in the Bush II administration called the Office of Strategic Influence that was supposed to be in charge of disseminating how information was disseminated during the Iraq War and stuff like that, and it was I think quickly became it's now defunct obviously, but it folded very quickly. But anyway, so they used that as the name of the band, and what happened was Jim Matheos was friends with Kevin Moore, who was originally the keyboardist for Dream Theater, and he had left Dream Theater at this point. It was about probably close to 10 years out of Dream Theater at this point. But he was friends with Kevin Moore, and he sent Kevin Moore a bunch of demos for like a solo album he'd been working on, and he had written all of these huge riffs and all these parts for all these songs. Kevin Moore took it and chopped these riffs up and moved them around and turned them into this whole other thing, and then added his keyboards to that. So it's this very weirdly done, weirdly arranged album. But he added his keyboards to that, and then for drums, for bass, they got the dude from Gordian Knot to come in, and then for drums, they got none other than Mike Portnoy to come in, Mike Portnoy from Dream Theater to come in. And so OSI became not just a one-off project, it became an ongoing thing. Mike Portnoy left because he just wasn't feeling it, and I think just didn't have time. And then also I think he and Kevin Moore, probably, from what I hear, really don't get along and that kind of thing. But Jim Matheos and Kevin Moore kept OSI going. But this first album, OSI by OSI, is Such again, it was such a captivating record. And this came out right when we were getting into we'd gotten into the Iraq War, and it was coming out that there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and Bush had lied and everything. And it was if you were alive in that time, it was a very weird 1-2 punch, because first we had the paranoia, the fear and paranoia of 9/11, and then W gets us into this totally unnecessary war. Do not start in my comments telling me how the Iraq War was really necessary or something like that. I don't want to hear it. But anyway, gets us into this fake and phony war, lies us into this war that goes on for years and years and years, and all of this. And so it's like this feeling, this very weird, haunting feeling at that time of like, not only did this bizarre, horrifying terrorist attack happen with 9/11, but the people that are supposed to be protecting us and taking care of us, ultimately betrayed us, used our paranoia and our fear and our need to feel safe. They used that against us. And those are very weird and powerful feelings. And the album OSI is about all of that. And it opens with this great instrumental, and then the first vocal track, it has this great melody comes in. Hate it when the truth unravels. Hate it when we don't get a fix. Hate it when the enemy travels, 'cause it's awfully un-American. And it's such a haunting line. And Kevin Moore has this, if you've heard Chroma Key, his solo project, he's got this like wonderfully like detached, kind of disinterested voice, this wonderfully like almost droning, almost mumbled voice that he has, but it so fits the atmosphere of this. And again, atmosphere is the word I keep coming back to. And he goes into the politics of it, but it's not in like a Neil Young rockin' in the free world kind of protest music type thing. We're not singing Fortunate Son or something like that, CCR and that kind of thing. This is a very like calm, thoughtful, haunted, like detached sort of like I'm so paranoid that I'm shut down kind of feeling. Such a fascinating way to explore those themes. Again, I can't recommend it enough. OSI by OSI. Number 3, King Crimson, The Power to Believe. So this is a very recent King Crimson album, but I think it's my favorite King Crimson album, even more so than, yes, Court of the Crimson King and all of that. If I did a just progressive rock albums, just purely prog rock list, King Crimson would probably get on it for one of their earlier albums. But this album, it's such a heavy record, like the heaviest thing they've ever done, even heavier than Red. Adrian Belew's vocals are awesome. He's singing through a distortion box. One of the songs, the single they put out from this is called "Happy with What You Have to Be Happy With." I love the sense of humor, the sense of like dark, sinister humor in the song, and the lyrics go, "When I have some words, this is the way I'll sing through a distortion box to make it more insane, to make it sound insane," and stuff like that. And he's just being very, self-effacing and all that. But it's such a beautiful, some of their most beautiful playing on distorted guitars you'll ever hear. Pat Mastelotto is amazing. Tony Levin is amazing. And then Adrian Belew, of course, is incredible. Robert Fripp, they're all just at the top of their game, and it's such a beautiful album. Also, I love PJ Crooks' artwork, and this is one of probably my all-time favorite painting by her is the cover art for Power to Believe, and she's done a lot of stuff for King Crimson, but check out PJ Crook if you don't know her. She's an amazing painter, one of my favorite painters. So, such an amazing album, and I can't recommend it enough. And talking about, the somber, the haunting acoustic song being the one that sells it, just like with Brain Salad Surgery, the song Eyes Wide Open is probably the best song on the record. And it's a very haunting acoustic song with guitars that are kind of like the Three of a Perfect Pair counterpoint stuff. So really incredible. Okay, now we're going to get to the two bands that you've been waiting for me to mention all along. Number 2, Rush, Moving Pictures. So again, this is one of those things where you get you get some controversy about whether or not this would qualify as metal music at all. But you have to understand something. I mean, this album, when this album came out, the concept of heavy metal was still a very nebulous concept. You know, at the time this album came out, Journey would have been considered heavy metal, that kind of thing. In a lot of ways, they still are. But it was still a very nebulous concept. And also, you can't deny, though, that there's some very boss heavy riffs on here. The Tom Sawyer, amazing heavy guitar riffs. Limelight, amazing heavy guitar riffs. But what can ever be said? It's kind of like the drummer in one of my old bands said, you always remember where you were the first time you heard Tom Sawyer. And it's like, yeah, I remember I was in the house we had when I was a kid. The second house we lived in Mississippi had these two rooms, instead of having a bedroom, I had like these two small rooms that, like, one of them was just big enough for my bed and my bed and my clothes and that kind of thing. And then the other one, I had like a desk with my music, my stereo and my TV and all that. And so kind of a little nook like I have here. And I was sitting there and I heard I remember staring out the window, hearing Tom Sawyer for the first time, and you're just transported to another reality. Tom Sawyer is one of those songs that affects you like few things can, especially if you're a prog rock nerd. And from that, Rush is my favorite band. And from that moment on, Rush has always been my favorite band. That album takes you in Moving Pictures. It takes you in so many different directions. It takes you on so many journeys. And what I love Geddy Lee, and I love Geddy Lee's voice. And I love Geddy Lee because his voice, he sounds like this little nerdy kid that's getting to go on this wild science fiction adventure, and you get to go on that adventure with him. And that's like fundamentally what I love about Rush. Geddy Lee, it's like if you've seen the movie Heavy Metal, where the scene where the character voiced by John Candy gets turned into goes from this spindly nerd into this super buff He-Man guy and gets traveled off to this foreign planet to have this wild space adventure. That's Geddy Lee. That's what Geddy Lee makes me think of. And that is paradise for me. I like the Terry Pratchett idea that heaven looks like whatever you wanted it, you personally need it to look like. And so I always imagine that if I am so blessed as to go to heaven, it will look like it will look like the animation from the Heavy Metal movie. And so and yes, I love that episode of South Park too. But anyway, that's why I love Rush. I love going on the wild science fiction fantasy adventure that is this band. I was so blessed to see them live on their last tour. I got to see them live on their very final tour. It was the only time I saw them live, and I was just so blessed, and it was so amazing. It's just one of those top 10 life moments was getting to see Rush. So I can't, again, Moving Pictures, amazing album. And then number 1, Dream Theater, Scenes from a Memory. And so Dream Theater is I say it's my number 2 favorite band, but there's really not any distance between. It's just Rush, by virtue of being Rush, is just this much more my favorite band. But then Dream Theater is the music of my life. I was blessed to know Mike Mangini personally when I was at Berklee. He was a really nice guy, really cool dude. I have seen Mike Mangini play drums from as far away as I am from this camera. He is an amazing drummer. And I'll tell you a little story. I'll talk about the album in a sec. I'll tell you a little story. So I had been working. This was not long. This is a few years after I'd finished Berklee. I was working on this solo album idea. This was before things like crowdfunding and everything. So I was trying to think, well, how could I get a label to sign me for this instrumental, Satriani Vi type album I want to do? And I thought, well, maybe I can try to pull some connections and make it like a supergroup. And so the first person I quote unquote recruited was Jeff Pilson from Dokken. He was playing in Foreigner, and I got to see. I can't remember how I got the. I think I won I won a contest or something, but I got a backstage pass to come see Foreigner play this acoustic show the day after their like stadium show here in Atlanta, or amphitheater show here in Atlanta, and they did this acoustic breakfast show at this place. And I remember the River was the local radio station. The River was putting it on. So Jeff Pilson was playing in Foreigner at that point, and I got to go backstage and meet him. And I got to speak to him right as he was getting in the limousine. But I ran up and said, hey, I have this project. Do you do session work? He's like, yeah. Here's my email and everything. So I gave him my email, and we messaged back and forth. I sent him my demos. He really liked it, and he said, well, here's my rates and everything. And I said, okay, I'm going to try to pursue a record deal. Can I say that you're on board? He said, yeah, absolutely. And so I thought, well, who do I know that can play drums? And I thought, I've got Mike Mangini's email. I'm going to message Mike Mangini. And so I messaged Mike Mangini, and and believe it or not, it was when I was coming home from that. I believe, it was when I was coming home from that concert that the singer in my band at the time called me and said, hey, Mike Portnoy quit Dream Theater, everything. And so not long after that, I was thinking, well, who do I know that could do this? And I could play drums. So I messaged Mike Mangini, and he just said, hey, thanks for the message. It sounds like a great project, but I've kind of got some other things I'm doing right now, and I don't ever really have time for, session work and stuff. And then it turns out, well, he was in Dream Theater, or at least hoping to get in Dream Theater. He's being at least auditioning for Dream Theater at that point. So that was what he was doing, was Dream Theater. And I had tears in my eyes when he got the gig. When I heard he got the gig, could not have happened to a nicer guy. But anyway, and then I unfortunately, that project never saw the light of day because I got really busy with the band I was in and everything. But I appreciate Jeff Pilson doing that. But anyway, so Scenes from a Memory, though, was the first Dream Theater album I ever heard. And again, I was living in Mississippi at the time. And the thing is, again, like you have to remember, you're living in Mississippi, in small town Mississippi. You feel so cut off from the world and from popular culture. And again, this was like before the internet and streaming could just hook you up with everything. And I was hearing in guitar magazines, I was reading about and hearing about Dream Theater. And this one issue of Guitar Magazine, John Petrucci had done his top, like a list of his top 10 favorite albums. And I didn't even know who he was at that point, but I read that list. And it had like Dixie Dregs on there, and Ozzy Osbourne, Diary of a Madman, Al Di Meola, Casino, all of these incredible records. I'm like, this guy's already my favorite guitarist. I haven't heard him play yet. I'm just reading about all these influences he has. And so that was when Falling Into Infinity had come out. And I'm glad I didn't get into them with Falling Into Infinity, because that was a very atypical record. It's a good record, but it's a very atypical Dream Theater album. The next album, Scenes from a Memory, that was where they had gone to the record label forced them to make Falling Into Infinity. They're like, you have to make a pop record. You have to have another hit. The Pull Me Under had been a hit. They didn't really have any hits on Awake. And so the record label was like, well, you have to do an album that's going to work with MTV. Of course, MTV was not interested in Falling Into Infinity. But they went to the record label and said, look, we are selling out clubs and stadiums and theaters all over the world. If you put us on tour, the fans will come. So let us make the kind of record we want to make. And they said, fine. And they made Scenes from a Memory. And it is such a stunning... I heard this album... and I remember putting this on. I was, I got this record from the same Borders where I heard Queensryche I was saying about earlier. I put this record on, and I was listening to it, and God, I even remember the headphones I was wearing when I put this thing on. I was listening to it, and you hear, close your eyes and begin to relax, and the sound of the clock starts ticking, and the hypnotist's voice, the therapist's voice is hypnotizing you and everything. And then you explode into Overture 1928, and you are just, again, it's that thing where you are just transported into the magical world of progressive rock, progressive metal. You hear the keyboard solo, da 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 da, da 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 da, and then John comes in with the lead. It's like bum 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 da 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 da, and these melodies, because of course they've built all of these, the instrumental phrases are built off of the melodies you'll hear later in the album, and the song melodies you'll hear, and it's just, you're just transported again. You're riding. You feel like you're riding Falkor over Fantasia. It's that perfect feeling that I love from prog metal. So cool, such a beautiful feeling. And as this album evolves, you go into this magical, fascinating world that deals with reincarnation and everything from extramarital affairs to political intrigue to reincarnation. The story on this album tells all of it. And again, it's that feeling of like the same feeling you get from Trans-Siberian Orchestra and so many other prog metal bands like that, where you're just in this fascinating magical world where just everything, every imaginative possibility is open before you. And it's such a beautiful and captivating feeling, and everything on that record, the playing is phenomenal. That was another thing where, like I said earlier, I knew metal at this point. At this point, when I heard that, I could play Master of Puppets and stuff like that. But then I heard that, and that's on this whole other level. I was already listening to Steve Vai and Joe Satriani, and then Petrucci on that album goes a step beyond even what they're doing. And I got, I still have it somewhere, I got the VHS of, after I played the album into oblivion, I got the VHS of the Dream Theater Scenes from a Memory Live in New York performance, and watched that and was just blown away at John Petrucci's playing. And I was like, holy shit, this cannot be possible. This is insane. This cannot be possible. And I just started eating up everything Dream Theater that I could possibly get my hands on. That's why I say, like, it's very difficult to say Rush is my favorite band when Dream Theater is so close on their heels, but it's like Rush by virtue of being Rush. I mean, Rush inspired Dream Theater, put it that way, But anyway, I'm a Dream Theater fanatic. I've seen them live at least half a dozen times. And it's always amazing. I saw him finally got to see him with Mike on the View from the Top of the World tour. It sounded amazing. The only thing I didn't like about it was that they only 6 o'clock from Awake was like the only early Dream Theater song they played, and then everything else was from the latter period albums. And I know they're trying to say, like, hey, our newer material is just as relevant as the old stuff, and yeah, they won a Grammy for View of the Top of the World and everything. But at the same time, I was really wanting to hear Mike Mangini reinterpret the classic material. So I was like, oh, we didn't get Pull Me Under. After 6 o'clock, the earliest song we got on that set, I believe, was Count of Tuscany, So I wanted to hear the other stuff. New stuff sounds great. Wanted to hear the earlier stuff. And that was at the Coca-Cola Roxy. I've seen him so many times. I saw him on Gigantour. The first Gigantour was amazing. I saw him again with Queensryche and Fates Warning and on that tour. I was supposed to go see them at on the tour they were doing with King's X and Joe Satriani. I was supposed to see that tour, and I was super fucking psyched about it. But I was 18, and when I got to the Tabernacle, found out that there was a cigarette promo being done at the venue. Could not get in. They said what you could do is if you're under 21, you can go down in the basement of the Tabernacle and watch the event on live, on TV, on closed circuit television. I said, no, fuck that. And I went, and what I didn't realize was, like, I physically grew up very young, and so I looked like like I do now. If I had just gone down in the basement, waited for it to start, and then just walked up the stairs, probably nobody would have questioned me. But anyway, so that was my missed opportunity to see Dream Theater, which sucked. But anyway, the whole thing, though, I've like I've said, I've seen him live at least half a dozen times. Saw him at the Orpheum in Boston, which was that was on the Train of Thought tour. That was incredible. And one of my standout memories was, if you know Dream Theater, Mike Portnoy used to always sign autographs with "Eat My Ass and Balls," and that was like an ongoing joke with the fans. So if you know the song "As I Am," the chorus goes, "To the doubtful I demand, take me as I am." And so on the last chorus of that, James LaBrie is singing, he says, "To the doubtful I demand, eat my ass and balls." And he got like this huge, cheer from the audience for that and everything. That was probably my favorite show of all the ones I've seen him do. And they did all of Change of Seasons at that one. It was an incredible show. But anyway, so as you can tell, I'm a super huge, ginormous Dream Theater nerd, and will continue to be. I do, unfortunately, as much as I love the Mike Mangini era, this is not his fault at all. I love Mike Mangini's music, his playing, but unfortunately, it is not quite the same without Mike Portnoy. Just like, Pink Floyd was not quite the same without Roger Waters. Van Halen was not quite the same without David Lee Roth and all of that. Mike Portnoy, far from just being the drummer, was very much involved in the songwriting, in the arranging, in the business decision-making process of the band, all of that. Now, I do not like, let's call a spade a spade. He left Dream Theater because he was hoping to get to be the drummer for Avenged Sevenfold full time. I hate that happened. That Avenged Sevenfold record he made is amazing, but I hate that he left the band and everything. I know he was not satisfied in Dream Theater for a long time, but it's kind of like, from an outsider's perspective, it's like, dude, you were the drummer for Dream Theater. You're living the dream of me and so many, you were in Dream Theater. You're living the dream of me and so many other musicians. So it's hard to feel sorry for you feeling unsatisfied in Dream Theater. I know it looks different from the inside, but anyway, so yeah, the Mike Portnoy albums feel like the albums that define Dream Theater, and they have that extra little something that the newer albums don't have. I still love the newer albums. They're a joy to listen to, but it's just not quite the same. So anyway, that's a very long, very thorough list. This has gone on a lot longer than I have mixing and mastering to do, and I have keyboard and synthesizers and programmed synthesizer orchestral stuff and everything to do for the new album. Shit, I've got you people have got me talking too long. I've got too many things, too many overdubs and mixing and masterings I have to do. But anyway, so those are my top 13 progressive metal albums. Thank you for listening, and thank you for prompting me to do this stuff, because I certainly enjoy talking about things like this a lot more than the various political pundits being idiots and that kind of thing. And then also, a lot of you wrote in after the black metal thing. A lot of you wrote in with a lot of bands that I'm not familiar with, which is great. I've got more stuff to check out. But unfortunately, the people like, have you ever heard of this? Ever heard of this? I'm sorry, I'm a little too out of the loop, I guess. So I need to go listen to a lot of that stuff you recommended. Anyway, so there you go. Keep your music questions coming. Somebody was asking about the Axis of Empires recording process. I'm still going to do that video at some point. So fun stuff. Anyway, take care.